All right. Hi, everybody, and good morning. This is our CFB Talk 105. My name's Bob Ekayeri, and I wanted to just thank all of you for joining us today for this conversation. We're going to be talking with Princeton head coach Bob Surace, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So, just to kind of give you all an introduction, he's in his 13th year at the helm, 12th season overall. He took the job at his alma mater in 2010 and has won four Ivy League titles, one of them outright in that just stellar 2018 season, where the Tigers finished undefeated and in the top 10 of the FCS coaches poll. He himself played center for the Tigers from 1987 to 1990. After finishing last season ranked, the Tigers are, as of this week, finally ranked in both FCS polls. I'm not sure quite why the other one was taking so long. They've been ranked in the coaches poll already for a couple of weeks. And heading into this weekend's game with Dartmouth, they are currently the lone unbeaten Ivy League program. So, Coach Surace, thanks for joining us and congratulations on the season so far.
Thank you. Am I on now?
Yes, you are. All right. So, defense has been particularly opportunistic this season. The turnover margin is just stellar, and you've got 10 guys with at least one interception and, allowing like 11 points per game, 70 rushing yards per game. What's making this unit so solid this season?
Yeah, well, I think there were three things when we reviewed the previous year and where we really wanted to focus on, small improvements. One was when we went into spring ball, looking at different ways where we might create opportunities to get the ball back, right? Really focused on punch outs, things we can do, certain things in our coverages that I thought our defensive staff has been tremendous. The second was red zone. We were not very good in the red zone the previous year defensively, and we've made slight improvements there as well. And then the third was we lost some longtime starters. Three of our four secondary guys were 4-year starters that graduated. Jeremiah Tyler was Player of the Year. A couple of inside backers that were longtime starters. Sam Wright was, if we could have nominated two guys, might have been second for Defensive Player of the Year. So using our depth, which we felt we had a great winner in our lifting and spring ball, we could play more guys.
You do have an incredible amount of depth because I was just thinking that you've started 5 different quarterbacks in each of the last 5 playing seasons. So you have folks who can step up. I mean, this year you've got transfer quarterback Blake Stenstrom, who's out of Colorado originally. And on top of that, by the way, I'll get to the wide receivers in a second because obviously you have Dylan Classy and then Andre Yosevash. But how do you prepare a team going through different quarterbacks each season?
Yeah, well, again, and credit the offensive staff. We run a very fast-paced tempo, so we're running more plays in practice, which means the starter is going to get the bulk of the reps. But when I coached in the NFL, Carson Palmer got every rep, and the backup quarterback took scout team reps. We're able to get our backups at every position, but in particular quarterback, prepared and get them reps. So last year, for example, Cole Smith was the starter. If we had a 10-play period, he's getting the bulk of them, 6, maybe 7, but Blake was getting the rest. And I think keeping them prepared in season naturally allows us to turn the page. You go in the off season, obviously there's competition, and but he was much further later.
Got it. It's so funny. I wish my co-host JD was able to make it. He grew up in Hawaii. So when we saw that Yosevash was out of Punahou, we started kind of laughing because we always end up talking about where all the top players come out of Hawaii. And he's a multi-sport athlete, as I recall. He's great at track.
Yeah, he really, he was maybe a little bit of a late bloomer in high school. Loved him, in the recruiting process, camp. And then his track senior year, I don't know what he long jumped. You have to look it up. It was a lot. And our track coach, who is legendary, Fred Samara, has been here since before I was a player, won about 50 Ivy League titles. We share a lot of guys at times that are two-sport athletes. Said, hey, do you mind if, we look at Andre for the sprints and the jumps? No problem. Then he never met him. Then he sees him. He goes, this guy is going to be the best decathlete in the country. And I was like, well, if he runs the decathlon, he's never pole vaulted through the shot put. We're not going to get him in spring practice. And we made we worked together, and we worked together a lot with guys that's okay, because Andre is so diligent. The work he does in the summer, the work he does, in the off season around track would allow him to reach his abilities as a football player as well.
Yeah, and being a multi-sport athlete, I've noticed you have several key players, at least in the past and in the present, who've been able to share that kind of their athletic talents across programs at Princeton.
Yeah, and when I coached in the NFL, Marvin Lewis would say, "The more you can do," and pretty much meant it. Look, if you're a receiver that can play special teams or those type things, but to me, one of the beauties here is they get to define their experience academically. They get to define what they want to do career-wise. They get to define what they want to do, and we don't have to set limits on them. And we have occasionally the exceptional that can learn how to pole vault and throw a shot put and do all those things as well as anybody in the country, in addition to being the type of wide receiver he's become.
So you've got Dartmouth this week, and the last three meetings were hyped for both programs. Both of you guys were looking really strong heading into the game. This year, the Big Green's having a bit of a down season. How are you going to be your keys to keeping the team focused on this game?
Yeah, and some of that, when you look at a record and you're like, oh, they're 2-5, and the record is what it is. They had Penn, they were up 10-7 with little time left. Penn had a great drive at the end, kicks a field goal, they lose in overtime, double overtime. They're up pretty big on Sacred Heart. Mounts a great comeback, they lose in overtime. Yale, who's playing great football, they lose, again in a very close game. So the record can, UNH is like, top 15 or so program. They're winning the CAA right now. They lose 14-0 in a game that could have went either way. So the records can be thrown out a little bit when you watch film. They're a terrific team. They have a coach that's going to wind up in the Hall of Fame. Like this is a tremendous group. And for our guys, we focus on the video and the preparation, and that sobers you up real quick when you come in on Sunday, and you're like, the record. Maybe you're thinking, maybe we can slide by. And the second they watch the film, they know this is a outstanding football team we're playing.
You mentioned Coach Stevens, and I know you two, or at least are the only current coaches, I believe, to have won Ivy League titles as a player and a head coach. What's the value of having been Ivy League players in coaching the team now? Is there value in the head coach having come from the Ivy League himself?
Well, I think there's value in, you love the place you're at, right? Buddy was a player of the year, not only a champion, but the best player in the year when he played. And I'm sure his friendships go way back to his playing days. It's no different for me that way, that, I'm not on a whole lot of technological group chats, but I have one with my roommates and I have one with my college teammates, that way. And there's some, a little bit of guys on both, but I'm on two group chats that way. And these are your friends. These are your lifelong friends, the people you care about the most. And so there's a responsibility that, when the game ends, I'm going up to a tailgate and I'm in a tunnel, and Tom Crickey and Jason Garrett are in the tunnel. And, Jason's, talking about our quarterback play and how poised he was, and was just gushing and effusive with praise. And these are guys I played with. And then, you go up to the tailgate, and it's not only guys that I shared the locker room with, but it's guys from I coached. There's guys that played before me that shared this experience at Princeton. And, you understand the responsibilities, but there's my wife also went to Princeton. There's a love of the place you're at. And I know he shares the same thing. Dave Archer's at Cornell. James Perry, who worked with us here at Princeton, is at Brown. There's an extra special love of the place and doing it at the place where you sweat so much.
Your father was a football coach for 25 years, and I believe he was your high school coach. Obviously, you're a coach, and so is your brother, Brian, at Fairleigh Dickinson. How much of this is a family business for you?
Yeah, you grow up in a locker room, and if you walk around Princeton, you're going to see all these signs: education through athletics. That is not to diminish the education in the classroom, which is it's the number one school in the country. It's not diminishing that, but um, I got a great education in a locker room in my place I grew up. And we're right now in this very divisive country on all these issues and everything else. And my dad coached a lot of great teams. There were never any issues. There were kids from all walks of life, rich, poor, different races, all those different things. And you are a team. And there's something about the value of a team that translates to once you finish playing sports, once you finish going to school, when you go out and you're older, that those lessons you learn are so valuable. And I couldn't wait for school to end and to get dropped off at the field to run around as a young kid with these guys that I thought were the Philadelphia. I grew up in South Jersey. I thought they were the Philadelphia Eagles, right? I knew no difference. These were my heroes. And then you go in the locker room and you see them joking around and, just having a great time with each other. And, you realize there's this value in sports for those that are in that arena that goes well beyond the hitting each other or playing and all that. That is, as I said, I have two group chats. It's all the guys I played with.
You were recruited by Ron Rogerson
Yes.
before his tragic death. That's awful. I mean, when I read about that, I couldn't believe it. Right before the season, and then the offensive coordinator takes over and coaches for 13 seasons. What what have you learned about coaching from your own time as a Princeton student athlete?
Yeah, and Ron and Steve Urbit, who's our associate head coach and defensive coordinator, was on that staff as well, and part of the recruiting process. And Ron's passion, he was also the O-line coach, and his passion was second to none. It was unmatched. Um, I hope when I go out on the field or in the staff meeting, I hope there's a little bit that I took from him that lives on, right? And I know the guys that played for him, they just absolutely to this day love him. You know, Myself, I only had 1 year with him, just love him. And I hope there's a little bit that lives on. And, Coach Tashius, whose son worked with us as a quality control coach for a year, you talk about going full circle. And, Coach, his organizational skill and preparation and, the way he hired staff members that complimented him, right? That they weren't all yes men, that were guys that might have different ideas. And he did such a great job managing that and allowing coaches to be themselves. And I think every person you work with, you take something from, or hopefully, if you're getting a great experience, which I've had throughout my career, you take something from them.
You left a short and successful run as head coach of Western Connecticut State, a D3 program, where you won a bowl and got them into the D3 playoffs to take that opportunity with the Cincinnati Bengals. What led to that?
John Garrett, one of my teammates, one of my closest friends, had been up for the Princeton job when Steve Tashius was relieved of his duties. And I was going to go as an assistant coach with John. John didn't get the job, and we had been close friends throughout. John got promoted at Cincinnati, and it's, Tuesday in early February, and I'm making recruiting calls, and I get a phone call from John, and he's like, "Hey, do you have any interest in the NFL?" I said, "Sure." He goes, "Great. I have a ticket. You're coming out tomorrow to Cincinnati." So I call home. I'm like, tell my wife, Lisa, we got to talk. Which, whenever you lead with "we have to talk," that's not a good thing to say, not cover anything else. I finished my recruiting calls and went home. And, she went to Princeton, grew up in Long Island, got her doctorate in psychology at NYU. And we were both working in Connecticut. Her whole life was about an hour outside of New York City. And, back then we didn't have like all this technology. We got out one of those old maps, and she goes, "Is Cincinnati on the left or right side? Because I'm not going to the left side." And Cincinnati was, when you opened that map full book, like a book, it was on the right side. And my AD, Ed Farrington, said, Paul Pasqualoni had been the head coach at Western Connecticut and really had done an amazing job, but struggled to even get interviews. He told me he'd fire me if I didn't take the job, if I got offered. So I wasn't left with much of a choice, even if it was on the left side of the map. Went out there and met some amazing people. Dick LeBeau, Hall of Famer, was the head coach. I'm up on the board. I'm 31 years old, I think, and Dick LeBeau's firing zone blitzes at me, and I'm trying to protect him with our Western Connecticut pass schemes. And Bob Burkowski, the offensive coordinator, amazing coach, learned so much from him. And then Paul Alexander's is the most exceptional line coach in the world, and he took me in, mentored me, and I think so much of the things we do are a combination of him and Marvin Lewis when he took over, and I worked for 7 years.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I mean, how it affected your approach as a head coach before you went there, and then after when you took the job at your alma mater.
Yeah,
Go
the
ahead.
Ivy League is the closest thing to the NFL. We don't have a draft, which, the draft is set up for parity, right? The Philadelphia Eagles are now 8-0, and the Texans have one win. And at halftime, that game was even, right? Our league is set up for parity in the way it works, with recruiting. It's set up where, it's going to be more challenging to get guys in at Princeton, Harvard, and Yale that way. And so that produces this unique parity, and it's in football only the way they do it in the Ivy League that way. And it creates these incredible challenges. And week to week, you don't play your best, right? We don't play our best tomorrow. It's not going to be a happy tailgate, right? In terms of that. And that's the way these games go. They're almost always one score games. They're tight games. They're competitive games. And, the NFL's taught you that, man, you got to turn the page no matter what happens after a game. And you can't pat yourself on the back after a win. And you can't literally be in sulking after a loss, because if you show up the next day sulking, you're going to continue to lose. If you're patting yourself on the back, you're not going to win very often.
Speaking of the Ivy League in general, it's got a unique approach, I imagine, to recruiting. And you've had several guys selected in the NFL draft, so clearly you're able to pull in significant talent. What's that approach like for you? Is it a national search with a smaller pool?
It's a national search with a smaller pool, because you have to have kids who are the level of student to be successful at Princeton. You have to have kids with a mindset that Princeton is going to change your life, right? If you engage and embrace it that way. There's a long-term view and what you want to do with your life that way. And we are going to coach with a schedule. And I haven't changed much from what I did in the NFL. Now, obviously, these kids are in class during the day, so I don't get them for 24-hour football other than camp. But those 3 hours or 4 hours during the course of a day, that's exactly what we did at Cincinnati. We are not going to coach them any less. The resources we have, the performance staff, the weight room, the technology we use, the way we watch film, the game plans we do, there is zero reason why we can't do that at the level as coaches that was done at Cincinnati, that's being done at Tennessee right now, right? That we are going to do and take advantage of every resource we have to get these guys to reach their abilities. And some of them have had the talent. This is unique this year. 32. We've never had all 32. As of yesterday, all 32 teams have come in at least once. Many of the teams have come in 4 or 5 times to see our players. Usually it's in the mid 20s, but all 32 teams were in. So, there's also players know if you're good enough, you see it throughout the NFL. If you're good enough, they're going to find you. Their job's to win games. Their job isn't to educate kids. It's to win games only. So they don't care where the guy comes from.
Well, that's a high compliment of the entire staff, including
Yeah.
everything from position to strength and conditioning, all
Yeah.
the way down to get those guys to where the NFL would come in and take a look at all of the teams.
Yeah.
There's one question I've been wanting to ask, and this is something. I mean, we cover all kinds of levels of football at our CFB. I mean, international as well. And you coached Princeton in one of the most intriguing exhibition games of the last decade. You headed over to Japan basically to play the Alabama of Japan's college football scene, Kwansei Gakuin University, in that 2015 Legacy Bowl. I've always wanted to ask you about that experience. What was that like?
Yeah. So, and not to digress, but I played. So in 1989, we beat Cornell at the end of the year. Schedule's different how they did it back then. And we tied for the Ivy League title. And the celebration was Princeton's first title since 1969. They tore the goalpost down. It was like you see sometimes with, it wasn't 100,000 people on the field, but there was 20,000 people on the field and tore the goalpost downs and everything else. And go into the locker room. We had a different locker room, but back then the field was a horseshoe, and the locker room was in the field house across the way. And all the alums are in there smoking cigars. And head coach calls about 6 guys over and lets us know we've been selected to play in the inaugural Epson Ivy Bowl, where the Ivy League was sending, I think it was 48 guys. It was like 6 per team to play a Japanese All-Star game. Right before Christmas, we flew over to Tokyo. We played the Japanese All-Star team. Johnny Unitas was one of our coaches. Maxie Baum, the old Cornell coach and Green Bay Packer, was the um, head coach. And, I'm playing offense, and Johnny Unitas is calling the plays. At that time, the greatest
Wow.
quarterback of all time. And we got to experience Japan. I had never been out of the country, and it was the most amazing experience. I have friends to this day, a guy from Brown named John Skinner, whose son came on a visit to Princeton when he was younger, and he's now on the rowing team. I have friends to this day that played in that game from the other teams. Fast forward, they kept that game going for a few years, and they brought it back. And then there was these individual games. Princeton went in the early 2000s, and they called us up, and we had the opportunity to go in 2015. The most amazing experience. We had guys that didn't have passports, guys like me that had never been overseas, guys that had never eaten sushi. Right? You're talking about, when you say education through athletics, every day we practiced and every day we did something culturally. And my kids flew over, and they were really young at the time. They were 9 and 11, and that's the greatest trip. And these guys that played in that game won championships and all that. They graduated from Princeton. They're in their careers. They will say that's one of the most amazing experiences they had on that. And we're about to this year bring back it's not going to be called the Epson Ivy Bowl, but an Ivy League All-Star team is going to go play in Japan. And I can't wait for some of our players to have that experience.
Yeah, I was actually just talking about that with I wouldn't say like close friends, but we're friends with one of the reporters over at the Japan Times, John Gunning, who writes a lot of English, sports, and he was talking about that. The Ivy Bowl, it's in January. It's going to
Yeah.
be Japan's national team versus and I assume we'll see some Princeton alumni on that team heading over there for that game.
Yeah, our guys, and I think we'll do a selection process after the year, and Al Bagnoli is going to coach it, and he should, the dean of our coaches and another future Hall of Famer. And my goodness, for some guys that aren't NFL bound to get one more chance and to do it with guys they competed with that are getting this great experience in our league. And this game's going to be awesome, and hopefully this thing lasts for the rest of my coaching career here.
Absolutely. As we're kind of heading into the rest of your season, there's after Dartmouth, you've also got a pair of rivalry games. And I think, most of the national audience isn't quite as familiar with the Ivy League rivalries outside of perhaps, the game between Harvard and Yale. But how big are those rivalries, especially I know with Yale coming right after Dartmouth? What's the history between the programs?
Yeah, I think they're all, literally this week feels like a rivalry game, right? We've played Dartmouth in so many competitive, compelling games. But even when I first got here, and we've had our struggles, to be blunt, we've had our struggles, being on the left-hand side of the column against them. But, when both our teams were building and Buddy and I both, when we came back to our alma maters, and Buddy for his second stint, we had a little ways to go. And those early games, our teams might not have been the best, but those games were amazing, physical. You left the game with such respect for the opponent. And as we both, maybe improve the talent level, our schemes, whatever on that, these games have been thrilling games. And I feel like each week, you head into Saturday night game ends. I do the tailgate. I come home, I plop on a couch, turn on college football, and I put on the next opponent. And I'm like, these teams are so talented and so well coached that you don't get a chance to catch your breath. And until about midnight, I watch the opponent we're going to play. And then I wake up in the morning early on Sunday, and, from 6 a.m. till noon, I'm just watching the next opponent. And it really, you don't catch your breath. And that's how it's going to be. Cornell ended, and I had some fun at the tailgate. And then I kind of locked myself in a room with college football on, listening to it while I watched Dartmouth. And I was really hoping that their play was more indicative of a 2-5 team. And I'm like, this team's as good as any team he sent up here.
It's so funny. 20 years ago when I was in college, I had a friend who went to Penn, and she was telling me about, if we can beat Princeton, that's the season right there. We're going to take down the goalposts and throw them in the river if we win the Ivy League. And and they throw toast, but I guess they're going to your guys. You guys are hosting them, so there's no Penn students are going to be throwing toast on the field.
And aren't those traditions great, right?
It's awesome.
The students that decide to come, maybe they didn't have a football experience at their high schools, whether it's international students or students that maybe went to schools where the football experience wasn't the Texas Friday Night Lights experience. And they come to these amazing schools, and then on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, they can engage in the traditions of their school. And I think that's one of the really cool things here at in the Ivy League.
Well, Coach Surace, I know your time is valuable. As we kind of close out, I just wanted to ask you, what is exciting you the most about your program heading into these closing games of the season?
God, I just, it's funny. You get so excited in the morning. Outside my office, there's a statue of Dick Kazmaier, the Heisman Trophy winner at Princeton, and the only retired number at Princeton's 42 for him and the great Bill Bradley. And, he's in that, stiff arm Heisman pose with the ball in his hand. And, I come into work and I high five that statue. And I'm so excited to see the staff. I'm so excited. The players, they're so bright eyed and energetic. And, today's Friday, it's Fast Friday, and they're going to come out with energy. Meetings, they come into these meetings and they're so bright, whatever's going on. And there's a lot of pressure at college, right? To be a good student, to socially, to acclimate when they're freshmen. And those few hours you're with them, they're kids again. Right. We're coaching this kids game. We're playing this kids game, a game that some of these guys played Pop Warner when they were really young. And we get them in these moments where they're able to have joy and laugh and be together and bond. And, it goes really quick. Some of these guys have been with me since 2018. And I just remember being in their living rooms, having dinner with their parents, and thinking, I got these guys for the next, COVID added a year for some of them, but for the next 4 years. And those 4 years fly. And then, they're back at a tailgate, bringing their kids, successful in their jobs. And, that warms your heart when you see them that way.
Absolutely. And graduating with a Princeton degree absolutely never hurts with anyone's career goals. Yep. Oh, goodness. Well, Coach, thank you so much for joining us. This was a really interesting conversation.
No, this is my first Twitter Spaces. I like this. We're going to have to do this again at some point. I like it.
Absolutely. No, trust me, I had a lot of questions. I was talking, with Warren earlier, and I'm like, okay, yeah, no problem. We'll be able to fill time. And so we'll
Warren's
definitely have to
probably
revisit.
like, if he can turn the phone on, that's a step up. So, it actually worked.
Well, we appreciate it. Thanks so much, and good luck this weekend.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, thanks to all of you listening. That's all we have for today. My name is Bob Akayeri. This was our CFB Talk 105 with Princeton head coach Bob Surace. Thanks to you all for joining us. Now, I'm going to hang up and listen.